Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Here we are going to talk about happiness and the science behind it with experts. And today I'm very excited. I've never seen anyone who's as excited as I am at 9 p.m. their local time. It's very late. Rebecca is, but she's very excited. So I'm keen. And today the topic is near and dear to my heart. And I think a lot of us would benefit from this nowadays. It's been an interesting few years and we're still sort of enjoying what is the aftermath of what you know. I'm not going to name it, but you know what it is. So the topic of today is tired of being afraid, how to overcome your fear and live to the fullest. I don't know about you, but I have a lot of fears. And today I would love to talk to Rebecca about it. A little bit about our guest today, a biologist with a difference. Dr. Rebecca Heiss is transforming her academic credentials into industry-leading talks. Rebecca is an expert in stress, and she's a keynote speaker in stress and fear. So she's our perfect guest for the day. And without further ado, Rebecca, please introduce a little more about yourself, why you're doing the work that you're doing, some fun facts about yourself, anything that you would like to share with our audience.
Yeah, sure. Well, hi. It's really great to be here. I'm so excited about today's topic. It is kind of my area of expertise. So I kind of fell into this. My background is in stress physiology, as you mentioned. So I have a PhD in stress, which is kind of fun, and a master's degree in evolution and human behavior. So I fell into this because I was, well, frankly, I had done all the things that I was quote unquote supposed to do in life. And, you know, I got degrees and I had this really lovely career and I've married a very fine man. And then, unfortunately, my sister-in-law, who was like a sister to me, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it kind of like pulled the rug out from underneath me. And I looked around at my life and I was like, oh my gosh, if that had been my diagnosis, I'd be so disappointed with this life that I'd lived, because every single decision that I'd made out of fear. And so I looked back at my life and I quickly, I quit my job, sold my house, and divorced my husband in a matter of a month. And it's on a fairly different trajectory because I realized that this is one life that we get. And I didn't want to be living out of fear and stress and anxiety. And so I started applying all of the academic practices into sort of practical everyday ways to live life. And that's what I'm doing now.
Oh, wow. That is one interesting story that you share with us. And I just love your honesty. Thank you so much for sharing. It must have been a really tough period, but you had a good laugh out of it, apparently. And that's
for sure.
Lovely. Yeah. Like to me, that's just like, that shows strength. I love that so much. You have no idea. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, really, I just love it. Okay. Now we know a little bit more about you, but we have a section at the beginning we called Have You Met Rebecca, where we would love to get some recommendation from you, just like a window into your world a little bit. So the first thing I always ask my guest, and I love this one because I love reading, what is a book you would recommend to our audience?
Okay, so there's so many books. Actually, you know what? I'm going to grab the one that is literally right here on my desk because this is one of the best books I have ever read. It is The Upside of Stress. It's Kelly McDonald, and she and we work in the same field. I mean, I could be very self-promotional. Like, I get my book, it's right back there. I'm okay with that too. But Kelly's put together this beautiful narrative around why stress isn't so bad. We always talk about stress as being like this awful thing that we should avoid and get rid of. And the reality is both of our work aligns around, well, is it really that bad? Or is it something that we actually need to transform and use as energy to help us recognize that like our life has meaning, because we don't stress out about things that we don't care about. So I would say grab the upside of stress. That's a good one. The other quick one I'll just mention is the empathy advantage. It came out, I think today or yesterday. Heather McGowan is a brilliant speaker, writer, thought leader. So check out the empathy advantage as well. Two good books.
Yeah, I literally just Googled that to save it.
There you go.
Gotta do it. Oh, wow. And the upside of stress as well. Thank you. I mean, these are good reads. It's just perfect for our show. You know, like anyone who wants to work on their happiness, come on. These are really important factors, right? Good one. Okay. So thank you for the book recommendation. What about a movie that you love, that you would like to talk about?
Okay. So I have to be honest with you. When I heard that I was being asked about like quick movie recommendations, or not even recommendations, just like immediate thoughts that come to mind when you say movie. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen a movie in so long. I couldn't come up with one. So I'm going to give you guys my favorite movie from like way back in the day. Ghostbusters. The original Ghostbusters has to be one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's so silly. I rewatched it recently and I was like, wow, this is terrible. And yet it's that nostalgic, like really just dumb humor that I'm like, all right, anything Bill Murray's in, I'm pretty much sold on. So go have yourselves a good laugh. It's a good way to relieve stress.
Yeah. We all have those movies that we love, you know?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
It's nothing silly. It's great. Thank you.
I wanted to be all serious about it. And I was like, nah, that's...
We don't have to be serious here. Yeah. It's just for fun. And it's about you, right? So this is great.
There you go.
Okay. What about a podcast? I'm sure you've done many podcasts before, but I wonder which one you listen to.
This one. I mean, this one, for starters. All right. Some of my favorite podcasts. Glennon Doyle, We Can Do Hard Things. Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach. Anything that Brene Brown puts out is phenomenal. Martha Beck and Rowan Macon have a podcast called Bewildered. That is, I highly recommend. It's all about being wilder. So bewildered, get it? And really, really finding our own selves within the culture, and not having to rely on the culture to define us. So those are three really good ones. Other than this podcast, obviously.
Aw, thank you. We appreciate it. It's still a small show, but we will hope to get there. You know, like all these experts that I love so much, you just mentioned, love Glennon Doyle.
Just because it's small, just because it's small doesn't mean it's not making a huge difference. So
yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you. We appreciate it. All right.
Sure.
How about your famous role model, or if not famous, your personal role model?
Oh, wow. I named a lot of my famous role models in the last Glennon Doyle, Martha Beck, Brene Brown. I think probably my role model is my family. There are so many incredibly strong, brilliant people in my family. My sister being one of them. My sister's always been my role model. She is strong, vulnerable, stands by her values, knows who she is, and is one of the happiest people that I've ever met, because she just finds that happiness, that joy in everyday life. So I'd say my sister.
Yeah. Oh, sweet. I love that. I mean, I don't know much about your sister, but I adore her already. That's
she's brilliant.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I would aspire to be doing. Just like find the joy in every day, and have fun with every single day and find happiness. And that's what we're here to talk about today, happiness. So we'll get to that part very soon. Final question on this part is, what is a course you've completed?
Ornithology. So fun fact about me, I'm a bird nerd, and I have a master's degree in ornithology. So I spent 10 years studying crows. And if you have any strange crow facts or questions, those are kind of my specialty. So wow. That's a fun little aside.
Wow. How many master's degrees do you have?
2.
Yeah. Okay. That one is interesting. That's an interesting one. Never heard about that before. I was like, crows? You study crows?
I'm a weird one. Yeah.
No, I would say you're unique. That's what you are. I love that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Perfect. You know, I've been itching to go back to uni and just study something that I just love. And I don't know what it is yet, but I just miss the uni
Well,
life. Like, yeah. So you just
it's a good
inspired
one.
me.
Well, yeah, no, don't stop. I mean, I feel like people get old when they stop learning, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things, the joys that I have in my own work is that literally my job is to learn every day, which is fun.
Yeah.
Great.
Fun. Well, I mean, you seem very happy. So now it's time for us to talk about happiness. Let's talk about happiness.
All right.
Yeah. What does happiness mean to you?
I think a lot about this definition. And to me, happiness is being able to show up as your full self, your authentic self in every circumstance and feel accepted by yourself, by your community, being able to look back with nostalgia on your past, being able to look forward to your future with excitement, but not with striving, and being able to stay present in your moment in contentment. So that's a really tall order, right, to achieve. But I think every piece of that is highly achievable. And so yeah, that's every day I think about, what did I do today to make the world a better place? What did I do today, looking back, looking forward into the moment, to be at peace?
Yeah. Oh, each of the definition that we've got on the show, it speaks a lot about the guest. And so for me, it's such an interesting experience because, like, let's just say I've recorded 20 podcasts. The 20 different definitions are just unique and they speak a lot about the guest. Like, some would be really focused on their academic life, but for you, like, I just feel that zest for life in general. Like, and I really, really, really love that you appreciate life so much that you think about beyond what you're doing for yourself, but also what you're doing for others, and what you can do to leave a mark in a way. And I think that's beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it's selfish too, ironically. When you look at the research, the way to become the most happy is to do stuff for other people. And so it just ends up being like not so altruistic, but the more we give, the more we get. And it's a cliche, but it's really true.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it reminds me of this, I think, like this episode of Big Bang Theory or something, where it was about there's no true act of altruism. Like, you do something good for another person and you'll feel good about it. So it's not entirely about the other person.
That's right.
But I think that's
exactly
life. Like, that's life. And that's just something that is beautiful about life, because we don't just give, we also get while giving. And that's the beauty of it, to enjoy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Cool. Love that. Okay. Now I'm feeling grounded. I'm feeling really relaxed.
Good.
But we need to address some misconceptions about happiness, because I think it will set the tone for our conversation. Now, again, this will be heavily influenced by your expertise, your life experience. But what are some of the misconceptions that you've noticed when it comes to happiness? What do people get wrong when it comes to happiness?
The biggest thing that I think people get wrong about happiness is that it lives external to them. And so what ends up happening is people try to chase it. They're going to chase happiness by achieving this thing, and they're going to be happy when they marry that perfect partner, when they get that level of salary, when they get that dream job, when they buy that. And so there's always a win. They're always win this, win that. They're chasing it. And this is the hedonic treadmill, right? As soon as we get there, the goal moves. And so then we're chasing something else and something bigger and something better. And that's a formula not for happiness, for disaster. I wish I knew the origin of this quote, but I'm going to quote it. Maybe one of your listeners can help us find the origin, because I don't want to misattribute it. But somebody put it out there. It's not me. I wish it was. Said that happiness is very much like trying to chase a butterfly. Right? You're trying to chase a butterfly, and the more you chase it, the more the butterfly maneuvers around and gets out of your way. You can't actually nab it. But if you're willing to sit still within yourself, that butterfly can come and land on your shoulder. And so I think so many of the misconceptions about happiness is that it's something that we can achieve. If we just work hard enough, we'll be happy. If we just fill in the blank, we'll be happy. The reality is it's internal work. right? It's not something that we achieve or that we get from other people. It's a state of mind that I think many of us can achieve if we think a little bit more inside rather than outside.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you. That's beautifully put. Our previous guest today, I was telling you earlier, I've had 3 recordings today, so it's like a pretty insightful day for me. The previous guest also talked about the fact that happiness comes from within, but a slightly different perspective from what you're saying, and I think it's just something we can expand on. And second of all, I just Googled the quote when you were talking about it.
Oh, good, thank you.
Oh, I hit the mic. Sorry. I believe that the quote is by Henry David Thoreau.
Yes, that would make sense. That would make sense.
Yeah. So there you go. We find the origin. But I think just to add to that, I feel like it's kind of related to the topic of the day as well. Because for me, like I remember when you were introducing yourself, you were kind of saying, oh, like I did all of that out of fear. And there's another saying or concept, however you want to call it. I don't remember who said this. I'll have to do the Googling.
I'm going to Google it. Hang on.
Yeah, you can Google it for me. But basically it goes, do more things out of love rather than out of fear. Something along that line. And it's like, it's in my head basically 24/7, because a lot of the times when it comes to like making decision about how I'm just going to handle something or just how to make myself feel better, I feel like maybe more often than not, more than half of the time I'm driven by fear. And that makes me feel unaligned within myself because I'm chasing something external to make me happy or just to feel better. Because, like feeling happy is one of the many feelings we get, right? And happiness is a spectrum of all the different feelings. So when you talked about that, I was kind of like, yeah, man, that hits hard, because I've heard that twice today now. It comes from within, and I've been struggling with it myself. Like a lot of the times I'm just like, okay, what do I do? Like, how do I feel better? Like, like I got to do something, got to meet someone, go out. Not really. It's internal work. Yeah.
But that's really hard to hear sometimes. And I feel like, it's easy to say. It's really hard to put into practice, especially if you're in a space where you're really seeking that. You're really trying to find happiness. And the more rocks you turn over, the more that butterfly is flittering off. And so, there are ways that you can find that within yourself, just even moving with intention, some deep breaths, those kind of practices that I know I've seen you on this podcast already kind of grounding yourself and just checking in with yourself. When was the last time, we're constantly checking on our devices and checking on this and checking on that. Like, check in with yourself. How do you feel? Because to your point, so often we operate out of fear because that's the way our brains are set up. Our brains are set up to pay a lot more attention to the negative stuff because that's the stuff that could kill us, right? And not so much attention to the stuff that makes us happy. Our brains simply aren't built for happiness. That doesn't mean it's not achievable. It's just that our brains aren't built for it. So we actually have to rewire our brains for this modern environment that we live in, because our brains are kind of ancient in the fact that they're built for a world that was a lot more sparse and dangerous and scary than the world we live in now. And so our brains need a little adjustment to say, oh, we're safe. Like that, me not getting that job doesn't mean I'm going to die. Like me being rejected by that potential partner, doesn't mean I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. Or our brain goes to these extremes, again, because those are things that kept us alive in the environment of our ancestors. But today, it's not particularly helpful. And we need to be more aware of that in order to override those instincts. Yeah,
absolutely. And you mentioned instinct. Now I'm going to run on that and just mention your book, because in your book, this is what our research team has found. It's called Instinct, Rewiring Your Brain with Science-Backed Solutions to Increase Productivity and Achieve Success. That's the book. And in the book, you mentioned that humans have subconscious instincts that prevent us from living our life fully. Now, obviously, you already mentioned a couple of those things, when you were explaining why we're so fearful sometimes. And it's not because of a life or death situation, but it's just how we are. So...
Right.
You've already set the ground, but can you please elaborate a bit more on that? Where should we go with this information? Because it's okay, now we understand. We get fearful easily, and this is just how we live our lives. But how can we rewire that perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire book on that. So trying to summarize it very quickly is a little bit tougher. But to begin with, I mean, listen, I'll give you 3 steps right now. When you're in a stressful state, when you have that like fluttering of your heart and you're sweating and you're fearful and you're worried and you're in that trapped space where our mind, kind of starts to repeat and fear the worst situation, the first thing we have to do is acknowledge it. I call these the ABCs, right? It's literally an ABC step. So first is to acknowledge it, recognize that you're in that state, which sounds so basic, but it's actually hard because we're in that state so much that our brain is like, oh, that's just normal. No, dude, it's not. Like, that's not normal. It is not normal to be that hyped up and that worried and that anxious all the time. So noticing that, seeing, going, okay. Here's where people get into trouble is they don't want to acknowledge it. They just kind of push it away and push it aside. And they're like, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. Well, emotions don't operate like that. Feelings don't operate. You can't just push them aside. It's like me telling you, don't think about pink elephants. Don't you do it, Liv. Don't you think about pink elephants right now, Liv. Don't do it. That's what we're doing with stress and fear, right? Like, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not worried about it. Well, of course, that's the only thing you can think about when you're trying to suppress it. So acknowledge it, recognize, okay, I'm in this state. Very good. The second step is to take a breath. Now, this is everybody's least favorite step because you've been told to take a breath since you were like high, right? And people are like, that doesn't do anything. Listen, people out there, please pay attention to this message. As a stress physiologist, one of the most important, most valuable tools that you have in your toolkit is right there. Because we don't get to control the hormones that our body releases. We don't get to control the situation itself. We don't get to control our heart rate. But we do get to control our breath. So we can slow down our breathing, take one deep breath. And what that does is it actually signals to our entire body to start the parasympathetic nervous system up, which is the whole system that slows down our body and says, oh, this isn't a threat. We got it wrong, right? So now it puts us back into control rather than those thoughts that are spiraling out of control. All right, so we've acknowledged the stress, we've taken a breath, and the last step is my favorite. So C stands for curiosity. Get curious. Ask a question. The reason I'm asking you to ask a question is because curiosity and fear cannot coexist. I'm going to say it again because it's really important, right? Curiosity and fear cannot coexist. For 200,000 plus years, no human has ever had a tiger charging them and gone, wonder how fast it's coming. Right? Like that doesn't happen. So our brain doesn't have the capability of creating a question, a curiosity when we're in fear. So if we're in fear and we can say, oh, hang on, I'm acknowledging it. I'm taking my breath. And then I'm going to ask a question. What's the smallest step that I can take to move forward? Or I wonder why ceilings are always white, right? Like you can ask any question.
Yeah.
But that kicks your brain out of that fear and into curiosity and begins the step of going, oh, okay, this isn't a tiger. I'm okay.
Wow. That's interesting because now I'm thinking about all the time that I got afraid. And then I'm just thinking about how I dealt with those situations and, with stress and fear. I'm going to tell you a story. This is going to be very funny, but recently we have this rental market crisis in Melbourne. And obviously it's stressful because, rent increases means that you have one or two options. You move out or you just deal with it. And that hurts your pocket, right? So I had this mini heart attack just before Lunar New Year. when my landlord was like, "Hi, we're going to increase your rent by $500 per month," and I was like, "Huh?" So, obviously the first reaction was like, "What the actual heck?" But then shock, and then start to feel, I was like, okay, fear. Can I afford it? It's getting more expensive. Can I afford it? Should I live here? But then I was like, you know what? I'm curious. Like, what's my new apartment going to look like? That was the question that I asked myself.
There you go.
Yeah. So now when you mentioned that, I was kind of like, oh, you know what? That got me excited and I forgot about it for a while. And then I just dealt with the situation. So, I mean, it did not stop the fear completely, but I redirected the fear into actions. I was just kind of like dealing with it. Yeah. So I dealt with it. And then I also got excited for a few seconds thinking about a change of environment. It was quite fun, actually, even though it was stressful. I'm not going to lie. It was stressful, but it was fun to think about something else for a second.
Lu, you just hit on something so important, and I'm so glad you told that story because it's a great illustration. Fear and stress don't just go away, but we can transform a lot of that energy, which is exactly what you did there. So our brain actually gives us a gift here, right? When we are really stressed out or in fear or anxious, our brain and body release a fairly complex hormonal cocktail, right? Of adrenaline and cortisol and all of these hormones that make us go, right? But when we're excited, our brain releases the identical set of hormones. So we have the same neurotransmitters and hormones, like our body's having the exact same experience, whether we're excited or we're stressed. The only real difference is right here, right? How are we interpreting this signal of our body? Are we having an adventure? Oh, what's my new apartment going to look like, right? Or are we going to have an ordeal? I don't know how I'll ever afford it. Maybe I won't be able to find an apartment, right? Adventure or ordeal. And that's what we get to control. We don't get to control, whether our landlord is going to raise our rent, whether we're going through an economic crisis. There's a lot out that is outside of our control. And we can spin our wheels and go absolutely crazy trying to control that. But we do get to control right here, right? How can I turn this more into an adventure? So I think what you did there is a great example of using that energy towards a challenge rather than a threat.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, it was interesting just because I noticed what you said, and I was like, oh, that was like one of the most recent examples. But of course, there would have been other occasions where I just let fear consume me. So there are two sides of the story. Obviously, everyone knows stories like this. Like let's just say you're afraid of having to say goodbye to a friend that you love so dearly. And, it's just, it's just like, oh, I'm afraid that my friend's going to move away and we won't have the same relationship anymore. And you start to spiral, right? And that impacts your overall happiness, because we're talking about happiness here. So I'm going to draw us back to that. So obviously when I could control my fear and I thought about something exciting, my happiness level was obviously increased. And then when I couldn't control it, when I was spiraling, obviously it was heavily impacted and I was a sad sack. So like it's pretty basic, right? Like from my understanding, and maybe people would interpret it the same way. If you can face your fear and redirect the energy, you'll feel happier. If you let it consume you, obviously your happiness will be impacted. But I guess there would be more to that. So what's your take on this?
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, when you just talked about your friend there, like I'm scared about my friend. I'm spiraling about, a friend, losing a friend. And one of the cool tricks to use in this is to recognize this, or then acknowledge it, recognize that and say, oh, okay, that must mean that this is an important relationship to me. That should make you happy, right? Yeah. That alone should be like, oh, wow, this is really important to me. Okay, so I should rejoice in the time that we get together because this is a really meaningful thing. We don't get stressed out about things that don't mean anything to us, right? So that's a nice signal to yourself to say, oh, this makes me happy. I should invest more in this. This is a good thing, right? Rather than stressing about the things that we can't control of, like, they might move away. They might. Yeah. But let's measure the cost of our inactions here of like not spending time with them rather than the potential action of them moving away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you that actually happened. So, but I did the same thing with the rental situation because my friend's moving to London. And I was like, well, there's my chance of visiting her in London. Never been to London. It'll be
Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
it will be an adventure.
Exactly. It's an
Exactly.
adventure. So exactly what you said. And now I understand why I felt better because
Yeah,
I didn't know the science behind it. Now I do. So there you go. That's a little bit
there you
in my
go.
toolkit. Cool. Okay. Well, this is also getting interesting because we were talking about your book earlier. And I believe that in your book, you also mentioned something called the three most common instinct driven behavioral pitfalls. And they are the short-term solver, the ego enhancer, and the hideaway. This is my first time hearing about all these terminologies. So please, can you please explain this to me and how it's related to fear, how we can conquer our fear, knowing all of these stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So this was a recent blog post that I did. And I talked a little bit about, well, the typical responses that we have when we're under stress. So the short-term solver is exactly what it sounds like. When we are in fear, we look for the easiest route out. Like sometimes that's I'm going to eat chocolate. Like that makes me feel better for a second. That gives me a moment of happiness, right? But it usually isn't the long-term solution. So leaders typically will try and grasp onto something that is quick and easy, but it's not an ultimate fix. And this keeps us on that hedonic treadmill of like, well, what's the next short term? What's the next short term? So I always recommend to people to like flip the narrative. Think about this as this is going to exist for the next 12 months. So how can we deal with this problem at its root rather than, trying to solve the problem immediately and instantly feeling better? Chocolate will take you places, but it's probably not going to increase your happiness in the long term, right? So that's the short-term solver. The second one is the ego enhancer, and especially under conditions of ambiguity and and feeling out of control. People like to feel like they can reestablish their authority, reestablish themselves as experts, to feel like they have some grasp on what's happening, what's transpiring, even when we can't predict the future. And so what the ego enhancer does is they pretended to have all the answers. Like, I've got this. I know how to show up. I know what the next step is. I know how to be happy. You just have to do this X, Y, and Z. Well, ego enhancers tend not to be very happy themselves because, listen, we all live with some degree of uncertainty. And so getting comfortable with that and recognizing that we don't have to prove ourselves to be valuable in a situation to help lead people through that uncertainty. One of the most valuable things that we can do is say, okay, here's what I know, and here's what I don't know, because that begins the conversation. The last instinct or the last response that people typically have to fearful situations is the hideaway. And this is the one that I'm most guilty of. So I know this one very well. Instead of responding, confronting, dealing with the problem head on, we avoid, we procrastinate, we hide, we stop communicating. And this is one of the least helpful instincts because the problem doesn't go away. It just typically gets worse, right? The longer you wait. So the analogy that I like to use here is instead pretend like you're an airline pilot. So we've all had those flights, right? Where you're sitting there and there's a delay and you don't know what's going on. So imagine you're going through really bad turbulence, or you're sitting on the tarmac and you've been waiting there for an hour, 2 hours, or the turbulence is getting worse and it's getting worse and there's no communication. That's even more terrifying, right? That's what hideaway behaviors are doing. You're absent. So instead, think about the pilot that comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a little bit of turbulence right now, or I'm not actually sure what's going on, but we've got it under control. Keep you posted. We're trying to find some smooth air. You feel so much better just knowing they don't have to have the solution. They're just looking for some smoother air, right? They don't have to know what's going on. Maintenance is coming to check. They don't know when. We don't know if we're going to get off this tarmac, but we're in communication and it relieves everybody's anxiety. So I think, trying to avoid those pitfalls is really key especially if you're in a position of leadership and trying to help others navigate uncertainty or stress.
Yeah. Wow, that is hard because, I think I mentioned this before on this show, perhaps this show, because I'm hosting two shows. Sometimes I get confused, but I think I mentioned on this show before that I also get to do a leadership role. And you were just speaking to me right there. I was like, oh, wow, okay. I can imagine different scenarios, how this can help or hinder my progress with the team. And I mean, in life as well, like it's just, it happens. Sometimes I'm like you, like I'm the hideaway. Like if I have a situation where it makes me fearful, afraid, I would run away. Like I would just numb it instead. Like I wouldn't even do a short-term solution. I would just hide.
Yeah.
There
and it's
go.
easy. It's a completely natural response. You think about stress responses like fight or flight, right?
Yeah.
I'm either going to fight, I'm going to be the ego and hey, I know it all. Don't look behind the curtain, but or you run away, and those are very natural, but they're not going to lead to solutions. They're not going to lead to long-term happiness. They're not going to lead to resolution of the problem in general. So.
Yeah, true. But I'm going to open a can of worms here, just because you mentioned that.
Good.
You mentioned the leadership factor in it in work, right? Like in the job context, it's very different. And I feel like a lot of the times, this is what happens. At least to me, I could solve any problem at work, and then I'll be the hideaway in life. Because the work has taken all the energy out of me. And so when it comes to a situation in life, I would just run away because I have no energy left. So I feel like this is something to think about. Like, I mean, this is just personally what's been happening. And I observe and notice this from other people as well, even if they are not in leadership positions, but in tough jobs, demanding jobs. And, like they don't have the energy to resolve the fears that they're facing in life about something else. Completely. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, that feels very out of alignment. Because if you're living in what Martha Beck would refer to as integrity, right? When you're your whole self and you're showing up as your whole self, then those confrontations or shifts that you have to have don't change from work to personal. It's not like, oh, I can't do it anymore. Like I have to relax and sit back here in our personal lives. Like you're still showing up as the same person at work and at home. So I want to challenge you to really look at that and see what's out of alignment, because that is a really hard space. And I know you're not alone there. Sometimes it literally is, I don't have any more spoons, right? I'm out of spoons. I have no energy left to give. And I think that's different than intentionally avoiding the problem or hiding away. So separating those two things out is really important too. Like sometimes you just need some self-care to say, I need to not be around people for a minute, and give myself that time and energy back.
Yeah, that is so interesting because the previous topic of the day was actually self-care.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah, everything's coming together, but that's a really good point.
I have a love-hate relationship with self-care. I'll be honest with you. I think I do. I think it gets overused. I think people use self-care to run away, rather than to do the work to transform the stress into something useful. Right. So, so often people are like, oh, I'm way over here. If you think about the traditional stress curve, it looks like a normal curve, right? So stress and performance, very low stress, very low performance. You don't have any reason to get out of bed. You're not even like the term paper is due in 4 years. Okay, not going to start, right? A little bit of stress, you get higher performance. And then on the other side of that stress curve, it's like, oh, you're in a bad space. You're unhappy, you're miserable. It's too much. And I think so often when we get into that space, we skip over the middle part where you're like, I'm going to go to a beach and I'm going to sleep for 12 days and drink it all off. Right? Like, well, that's self-care. But it's really escapism. What we want to do is find this balance where we're actually in flow, where we have stress, but stress is meaningful. It adds to our happiness. It adds to our purpose. It adds to the value of our life, rather than being so demanding that it's too much and so little that it's meaningless. So often people say, I just want to go on a beach somewhere and be alone. And I hear that a lot. And I'm like, okay, I hear you. And that's really scary because you're going to be so bored in 7 days, you won't know what to do with yourself. So finding that balance that allows you to have a meaningful, happy life actually requires some stress, which is not always how we think about it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And I feel like that's why we all need to do our own homework to understand ourselves better, right? Because a lot of the time you hear all these theories and you kind of hear a new insight and you're like, oh, maybe I'm doing that or maybe I'm not doing that. In reality, it might be something else completely, because there are just so many different factors in our happiness in life. It's not just stress, not just fear. It might be something else that we miss.
Yeah.
So I think doing our homework is very important. I mean, I like to call it homework. A lot of people hate the word homework, but I would like to say that as much as we do homework for uni, for school, we need to do homework on our life as well. Need to do that audit every now and again.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. So this one is actually in your book, I hope. So in the book, I believe you mentioned something called fear of the others.
Oh, I do. It's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. What is that?
Yeah. This is one of my favorite topics. So fear of the other, we evolved in a ancestral environment where we lived with people who looked like us, acted like us, operated under the same rules and regulations as us. And anybody who didn't, who was outside of our tribe, they were a threat, right? They weren't coming over to borrow a cup of sugar and they were going to kill us and potentially steal all of our resources, right? This is a really scary thing to see somebody outside of your tribe. Well, that is not at all the world we live in today, right? Like we have people from all different backgrounds, racial backgrounds, religious backgrounds, sexual orientation. Like we are one big conglomerate of a human race that has all kinds of different views and opinions and looks and our brains haven't caught up to that. So to this day, when you see somebody who looks different, acts different, thinks different, sounds different, the first thought, you may not even be conscious of it, but your first thought is not in my tribe. Now, I'm not saying we're all sitting around going, oh, that person is bad or that person is evil. That's not a conscious thing that comes up. But subconsciously, you're already creating and forming opinions and ideas about people without even recognizing them. And so that's one of the things that I spend a good amount of time talking about, because in order to be a happy, cohesive society, we have to overcome some of these instincts that are keeping us apart and keeping us out of community with people who look different or sound different or act different. It's actually a pretty unhealthy environment that only is a monoculture, right? If you think about biology in general, like if you only plant fields of rice for generations, like it's going to be a problem. And the soil is pulling up these nutrients, the same nutrients again and again and again, and you're basically killing the ecosystem. And I think the same thing is true about humans. If you're surrounding yourself only with the same people who think like you, look like you, act like you, you're pulling up the same nutrients, like you're kind of going to wither and die at some point. You need the variety of different viewpoints and ideas and cultures to really express your full self, and potentially find true happiness. So yeah, that's what the fear of the others is about.
Well, that's an interesting one. I mean, like this one in itself can open debates everywhere. And I mean, to me, at least, I have to be honest, my family can be in this category because they are often afraid of people that aren't like them and things that are new to them that scare them. And sometimes the way they talk about these things make it seem like they're annoyed or bothered by these things or these people, or even impacted by these things or people. But in fact, they're not. No one or nothing does anything to them. It's just more so the fear, because they don't understand what it is or who it is that they're facing. So I think it's interesting when I think about my own family, because they come from, a place where they didn't get to be exposed to the world out there. They didn't, meet people from other races, other countries. It's kind of like this whole interesting concept. And a lot of the things that the next generation, like me, my cousins, we want to do, it scares them because they don't understand how and why we could pull it off. Like it is, yeah, it's kind of interesting to me when you mention that. And it's a really good concept that would spark a lot of thoughts. I don't know what to do with this information yet, especially with my family, but I think it's kind of like, well, first of all, they need to understand what's out there, right? And it's a learning curve, even though it's important for them to know. It's kind of like, are they willing and open to learn? That's a whole different story.
Yeah, I think one of the techniques that I use here is finding the clear common enemy that's outside of a racial group or a gender or anything like that. So I use a sports analogy because once we find something in common with people, everything changes, right? It's really easy to see our differences. And that's what our brain is kind of focused on. Focused on the negative, not on the happiness, not on the positive, not on the good stuff. So I'll use a sports analogy here because it's easiest for me. But I happen to be a huge Boston Red Sox fan, right? So when I walk into Fenway Park, it's surrounded by all these other Bostonites, and they've got their caps on, and they've got the right colors and the right logos on. And it's not that I don't see race, gender, age, heaven forbid, political affiliation. It comes up. It just doesn't matter. And here's why. The second the Yankees take the field, those are our big rivals, right? Like we are united in our hatred of the Yankees. Ew, gross. Now, it sounds so trite and so silly, but like we're buying beers for people, we're hugging one another, and it had everything to do with this outsider group. And that's how our brains are set up. Our brains aren't set up to like love one another and be happy and together. They're set up actually to really protect us from those others, from those dangerous others. So my challenge to you is to find the other. Now, careful with this, right? We don't want to make it, even the Yankees, listen, there's probably some good people that play for the Yankees, but we can create an abstract other. I am personally very excited for the alien invasion, right? Because that I truly believe that can unite humanity, right? You've got this other that is a danger potentially. I don't know. I like to think that if they're intelligent enough to come to Earth, like they're probably decent. But so the abstract common enemy can be something even like fear. We're going to fight against fear. We're going to be training our brain to look out for fear, to look out for mediocrity, to look out for the trap of comparison. Those are abstract common enemies that I think are really wonderful things to fight against. So the comparison trap, for example, we're talking about happiness on this podcast. You want to find the quickest way to unhappiness is to be looking at these, the Instagrams and the social media and going, oh man, that person is living their best life. Well, they're posting their highlight reels, and you're looking at it while you're laying in your pajamas eating your 6th cup of Ben and Jerry's. I don't know. Like, it's probably not the best time. And so fighting a common enemy like comparison, like fear, can be a really powerful way to use your brain's natural instincts to look for the other, to look for the enemy to your advantage and really bring you more peace and happiness.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful thing that we can all try to practice, because it's very easy to kind of go, oh, I don't understand this, therefore I don't like it. Or sometimes I just don't like it. I don't know why. And that is because you don't understand it. So I just threw in the little story of my family because I've struggled with that personally, but I feel like a lot of other people might relate to their personal lives in different ways. It could be a social group that they belong to. It could be work. It could be friends. It could be anything. But yeah, we all have this, right? So, and I think
you're definitely not alone there.
Yeah. And when you mentioned social media as well, and like I was like, yeah, that's true. Like, 'cause sometimes you're like, this is the fun stuff that I noticed. It's kind of like, oh, this person's so cool, I'll never be friends with them. Well, you're just afraid because you don't know them. They're just humans, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair.
So
it's true. Yeah. And we're always comparing upward. Right? Like, look at all the people that are looking up at you and going, oh my gosh, what an incredible success. What an incredible, she must be the happiest person in the world. Look at her. She's on podcasts. She's running podcasts. She's beautiful. She's young. She's like, there are plenty of people that are looking up, and all we ever do is look up at what we could have, what we want, what we desire, rather than recognizing where we sit in a very, pretty healthy space.
Yeah, totally. It's just a reminder for us to all look at things with perspectives. And I think that's very important when it comes to fear as well. Because a lot of the time, fear and happiness, you're kind of afraid of what you don't know. And this is not just related to people, about the unknown as well. Well, you don't know what's going to happen because truly it hasn't happened. How would you know?
You can't. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so the more, I like to think of it as like a great mystery novel. Like, what fun. You don't want to know. How boring is it if you knew the answer? You're not going to read the book. It's like, I know what's coming. It's fine.
Yeah.
Go have some fun. Have an adventure of it.
Yeah, totally. Love that. And so there's another thing that you mentioned in your work. And I think this is when you do talks and things like that. You mentioned becoming fearless, where less is in parentheses. So can you please explain this and share with us what you mean by that? Yeah,
sure. I talk about fear less, right? I think becoming fearless is kind of a dumb concept, frankly. If I'm going to be very blunt about it, like, don't be fearless. There are things to fear, right? If there's a Greyhound bus coming at you full speed, don't step out in front of it. That's something to fear. That's not being fearless, right? That's not what we're talking about here. What I'm talking about is fearing less and being conscious of the fears that you have. So, our brains are incredibly capable of being conscious and aware of the stories that we tell. It's just that we don't necessarily tap into those stories all the time. So the whole idea behind becoming fear less is making room for more. See that play there? Less, more, right? If we fear less, we make room for more happiness, abundance, connection, love. We're making room for all of this other stuff just by tapping down our fear. So that's the approach to the fearing less.
Yeah, I really love that philosophy. I mean, now I'm going to have to think about this. This is going to be a long story. I'm going to skip the long story, but I have a tattoo called Fearless. So I'm like, okay, do I need to change it?
You have a tattoo that says Fearless on it?
Yeah, I do.
I love it.
I do.
I love it.
You're challenging me to rethink my tattoo. But no,
I love it.
Yeah. But no, I mean, to me, it was kind of actually like just kind of add to the story. It's similar to what you're saying. Basically, it's not like I don't have any fear, but I feel the fear and I do it anyway. That's why I got the tattoo. So I think it's kind of like a personal reminder. But
I love it.
You know what? We were supposed to talk about the practice, and initially we were going to ask you, what is the practice, to help us overcome fear? But since you mentioned fearing less, then I would say I would tweak the question a little bit. I would ask you, what is a practice that you would recommend to our audience to start fearing less?
I think it would start with fear setting. So I steal this from Tim Ferriss. So fear setting is all about really getting clear about what you actually are fearing, writing it down. So often, we have these fears and we don't A, share them with anybody, B, make them conscious by physically writing it down. And I'm talking pen to paper, folks, because when we do that, what it does is it moves it from the amygdala. That's where, our sort of ancient brain resides, our amygdala and our limbic system, where all these emotions are. And it makes it conscious and cognitive. It moves it to this frontal lobe where we process at a higher level. So by writing it down, we're bringing our fears to our cognitive space where we can process them in a more logical fashion rather than getting too tied up into those emotions. So we write the fear down. The next column over, this sort of a 3-column thing, right? The next column over, I want you to write down all of the things that you can do to prevent that fear from happening. Okay, what can you do? What are the things you can do to make sure that fear doesn't come true? And then on the 3rd column, if it does all go to pot, if the fear, the worst case scenario does happen, okay, What can you do to repair it? And when we go through that exercise, what we realize is the things that we fear, that take over our minds, really, there's a lot we can do to prevent that from happening. And even if it does, we can repair it. There are things that we can do to sort of choose a different adventure, if you will. If you ever read those choose your own adventure books, right? And these were big when I was growing up. I don't know. Like you really like, do you want to go into the deep, dark cave, or do you want to turn around and go back? And I'm like, ooh, deep, dark cave, right? You flip to page 90 and you like fall into a pit of despair. I mean, that's it. Well, then you get to go back to page 70 and make a different choice. And I think for our brains, we're set up to believe that we have this binary choice. And either if we go that way, we'll never go back. We'll never be able to do. Well, it's just not how life operates. We do get to go back. There are very few choices in life outside of death that don't get to be undone to some extent. So fear setting is a great place to start. I'm going to add my own spin to this. And I think this is a really important piece. When you're doing the fear setting piece, you're looking at the costs of your actions. But I think the thing that people forget about the most is the cost of their inactions. So what if you don't do anything? Right? What if you don't try out for that play, or raise your hand for that promotion, or take the leap of faith into whatever it is that you're wanting to do? Those, my friend, I believe are the biggest things to fear, because that is, man, those are the regrets that people lay in their deathbeds thinking about. Why didn't I show up? Why didn't I raise my hand? Why didn't I set the example for the next 8-year-old me? To me, those are really, really powerful tools to use in order to help you fear a little bit less.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's an interesting spin that you put there. I mean, this is my first time hearing about fear setting as well. So yeah. It's like new information on top of new information. It's great. Good. But then, okay, let's just say I'm completely new to this space. I have no idea how to get started. Now I have the tool. But when should I do this? Realistically, when should I actually sit down and do this? When the fear starts to creep in, when everything is okay, should I do this daily? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on you. I think, fear and stress are really personal, and everybody processes them very differently. So I could stand here and I could write a prescription for everybody on your podcast listening right now. And I could say, every day you should do. And you know what? It won't work for 90% of the people. 10% will be so happy. And they're like, yeah, I should do this every day. Here's what I do. When I start to feel that fear rise up, I take a moment. I do my ABCs, right? I get curious. I talk out loud to myself. All right, Beck, what's the next thing? This sounds really cheesy, but that talking out loud is actually a technique. So, I don't know if you're a LeBron James fan or not, but LeBron James does this all the time. LeBron James talks about himself in third person. He's like, LeBron James does what's right for LeBron James. And it sounds absolutely absurd, but there's a technique there. So what he's doing is he's giving himself emotional space. And emotional distancing allows our brain to hear somebody else coaching us. So I say, okay, Beck, what are you afraid of? Like, hey, Beck, just chatting with a friend here. What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
And it gives me that emotional distance to be clear with myself. So I tend to do it in the moment, as long as I'm not in a really heightened state. If I'm in a really heightened state, and I think one of the mistakes people make when they are afraid, they're like, I just want to be happy. Why can't I just be happy right now? Is they try and make that shift into peace and calm. They're like, I'm going to zen out. Well, your body's in a heightened state. So do something active with that, right? Go for a run, do some jumping jacks, whatever it is, so that you're using that energy and transforming that energy into physical exertion if need be, so that it makes sense in your body. And your body goes, oh, okay, still alive. We must have outrun some predator here. Then sit down and do the fear setting. So it's a very personal choice. But I would say, see what works for you. Try out couple different techniques and See how often you need to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. It's more customizable because, a lot of the time it's kind of like, you got to meditate every day for it to work. And I'm like, now I'm afraid to miss a day. Yeah.
Right. You add in fear. You add in fear to it.
Exactly.
It's like, wait, that's
but that's not the point of meditating, right? Like, that's not the point. Like, you're not supposed to add more fear to your life. So I like it when you say, find out what works for you, because we need to hear more of that. Like, just do what works for you. As long as you know that you need to do it and you have the tool, you just pull it out of your pocket when you can. Okay, cool. So we've covered all the questions. We've gone through fears, it's a roller coaster. There's a lot going on. And I feel like if we continue to talk about it, we can unpack even more. But we have this one interesting question from the audience that I would like to ask you. It's a little personal, but I feel like it's interesting and more practical.
I'm open to it. Yeah.
When was a time when you were able to overcome your fears or doubts? What did you have to do? Why did it fill you with anxiety? And from where did you draw your strength to succeed?
Oh, I love that question. All right, I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to tell a story to tell the story. So when I was 8 years old, I have always loved the spotlight. I've always wanted to be like on stage doing what I do now. And so at 8 years old, I grew up in a really small town. So not like a whole lot of speaking opportunities for an 8-year-old in a small town. So I joined my local 4-H club, which is, this youth club where you can enter public speaking competitions. So I did. I entered my citywide competition, and Lu, I won. Now, I was the only competitor, so it wasn't that big a deal, right? Okay. But I got to go on to like county, and at county there was more competitors, and I get first place again. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I know exactly where I'm headed in life, right? Like clear trajectory. I get to states. Now, it's state final. That's a big deal to an 8-year-old. There's real competition. I'm nervous, so I'm practicing. The day of states finally rolls around. And what happens? I don't show up. I played sick the day of the competition. Because it simply felt safer to me to not go all in. Right? To hold back, because I had this little voice in my head that said, if you fail, what will that mean? If you've given it your all, what will that mean you are, right? You're going to be defined by this. Oh my gosh. All right. So let's fast forward. So I mean, that was a formative experience for me. And then years later, I told you about in the introduction about having losing my sister-in-law. And it was right after this time where, I have no house, I have no income, and I'm in this panicked state a bit of like, what am I going to do with my life? What have I done? I've just blown it all up. And I interviewed for this job, and it was an incredible position. It was in STEM education, and I was like, yeah, I'm back on my feet, baby. Like, I got the call, I got the job. It was more money than I'd ever made. And I was like, I'm not going to take this job. And the reason for that is I had become a short-term solution, that pitfall, right? I'd been a short-term solution person. I saw this panic and I was like, I need a job. I need a job right now. And when that is dangled in front of you and you're like, wow, that solves my problem. But it doesn't solve the deeper problem. Right. The deeper problem is that I had been ignoring what I wanted to do my entire life. I had been following what I was supposed to do, like following the money, following whatever it is that's the prestige, the money, the degrees. I was like, oh, I'm falling into that pattern again. And I distinctly remember pulling over to the side of the road. I was driving when I got the call, and as I was saying, yes, that's amazing, I'm so excited, I was like, thank you so much. I don't think the position's right for me. And I had that moment, as you might imagine, hanging up that phone going, what did I do? Really? Oh my gosh, that's what I needed. But I think the strength and fortitude that your listener was asking about there comes from a strong attachment to stress and the values, right? So our stress really aligns us to a fulfilled life. If we have no stress, we don't have a fulfilled life, turns out. So in thinking about where I wanted to be, who I truly was, how I wanted to show up authentically every day, which you listen to the start of the podcast, right, is how I define happiness. I knew that that path wasn't going to take me there. So again, allowing myself to feel the stress, aligning it to the value that I had in, I want this happiness. I want to show up as myself, fully pursuing, going all in, not having that 8-year-old show up again and say, hey, remember me? Remember how you didn't show up for yourself before because it was scary? We're over that now. So I think, having those experiences and learning from them and growing from them. And listen, that I wish I could say I had that experience once as an 8-year-old and got over it. I mean, I probably had to learn that lesson a dozen times before I finally got to the point where I was like, okay, I think I know what I have to do here. So, pay attention to that voice. Pay attention to that flutter in your heart that says, is this where we want to go?
What a great story. Well, thank you. I mean, there's so many different layers to that because the story to tell the story was very different from the story itself. But we're getting the same lesson from it, right? It's listening to your fear. What's your fear telling you? It's very interesting. Well, that also gave us another window into who Beck is, as you call yourself.
I do.
But I feel like now it's a perfect time for you to share a little bit even further before we wrap up, because we always invite our guests to talk about things that switch them on, things that make them feel passionate, things that they really want to share with other people that they just haven't got the platform to do so. And this is open mic. So take it away. What would you like to talk about?
Man, okay. I think probably the thing that is most important to me right now is helping women find their voices in leadership, in authenticity, in happiness. I think in particular, and this is true for all genders. So men, please don't feel discounted by this. Actually, I'll talk about you all in a second because you all have a separate struggle. But I think that the culture has defined women's roles for so long as you will be happy if you have children. You will only be happy and fulfilled if you find a husband or a partner or whatever it is. And I think more and more, and women are getting to my age or a little bit older and going, wait a second. Where's this happiness thing I've been promised? I did all the things. I checked all the boxes. And I don't want women to get to this point, right? I want us to understand from a much younger age that checking these boxes, fitting into cultural norms, doing the shoulds doesn't lead to happiness. That is inside work. So men, all right, now I'll switch genders for you. So for men too, there's this expectation of status. Women compete, and I hate this, but this is evolutionarily drilled into us. We compete with beauty and reproduction. Oof, that's a tough one. We can dig into that if you want. Men typically compete with status. How much money you got? What kind of car you drive? What watch are you wearing? And we think that these paths will make us happy. But that's just our brain lying to us, saying this is how reproduction happens, and that's how the continuation of the species will occur, right? That's the biology driving us towards these outcomes. But it doesn't lead to happiness necessarily. And I think culture has reinforced these ideals and ideations that aren't helpful to us having a truly fulfilling life. So taking off the table the pressure of achieving high status for men, and taking off the table the pressure of achieving the perfect body and 12 kids that are perfectly raised and well behaved for women, right? Like, what does that look like when that's all removed and we can just show up as a gender or no gender and be a human being having the experience. That to me is really something that's exciting. And I want to dig at it a little bit more, because I think too many people fall into those traps.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think I would leave the men to speak for themselves, but as a woman, I can totally relate with that, because there's that standard, and I don't want anything to do with that personally.
Yeah.
And it's hard because, culturally speaking, coming from an Southeast Asian family, it's very important for them that my success means that I have a partner and kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To me, it doesn't look like that at all. And so it's kind of like, this like constant conflict and struggle of my level of happiness versus what they think my level of happiness should be. So yeah, like this is the beginning of a very long conversation if we want to go into that. But I totally agree with you. We need to, talk about this more. I don't think we talk about this enough as a society. And it's impacting everyone's mental health if we just keep ignoring the problem, because it's a very big problem.
I agree. Yeah. And I think so often, family is another, well, we can go down some very deep rabbit holes if we do this, but because your family, we're culturally raised to want to please our families, right? Like I want to make my family happy, but if my family's happiness compromises my happiness, that doesn't work, right? That's not an equation that I want to buy into. And if by being accepted by culture means that I have to reject myself, I think way too many people reject themselves for years trying to fit a culture, trying to fit a norm, trying to fit a family. And at the end of the day, I think I truly believe this. I truly believe that people are genuinely good and genuinely trying to help one another. So like your family wants you to be happy. And my guess is they believe that the only way you're going to be happy is if you have a partner and kids, right? And that is them trying to help you. And it's so hard to separate that and say, okay, thanks. I see that you're trying to help me. And that's not what will truly make me happy, and convincing them of that. It's just such a challenge.
But yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's just like, I mean, I told you, right? This is like a struggle that I have. And I also believe that the love is there. It's just sometimes it feels conditional when they're kind of like, oh, like you got to do this so you'll be happy. And then, like, this is what I want to see as well. And I mean, I know it comes out of love. I know it comes out of care. I know that they truly want to help. But I think it's also a matter of making sure that everyone understands that what you want for others might not always be what they want for themselves. And that the first thing to do is just to have that understanding.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a process.
It is. And it's particularly challenging in families because part of their happiness is probably still dependent upon, and I'm not saying it should be, but is dependent upon your success, right? We do this to our kids. We're like, well, I'm going to be happy when my child is successful. Whoa.
So you're not happy now?
The amount of pressure that puts on your child is super unfair. Your happiness being dependent upon anybody else is super unfair. But again, I believe that's done out of love. I believe that's done out of like, I love my kids so much. I just want them to be X. Well, okay. How about if we let everybody define their own happiness? Like we started from the very beginning with what's your definition of happiness? I cringe sometimes when you read my book title about increasing productivity and achieving success. Well, success is the same thing with happiness, right? Like, what's success to you?
Subjective.
Yeah, success to me is having the freedom to decide what that looks like. That's success, right? Success is for me to say, oh, I have the freedom today to get on a podcast at 10 o'clock at night because I want to, But success to other people is that's what my bank account has to read. That's what this has to be. And so getting really clear about your own definition of happiness and sharing it, I think, with your family, not to like get on my psychologist horse here, but like, and sharing that with your family and asking them for what their definition of happiness is. I think that would be a really productive discussion for all of us to be having.
Yeah.
Like, what's your definition of happiness? And how do you achieve that for yourself?
Absolutely. I love that. What a nice message to close with. I mean, we can continue talking about this all night, but I know it's late. I think I should let you go. Yeah, I should let you go. But we'll probably make time and come back next time to get some new perspective from you if you're open to it. But it's been a really great discussion, honestly. It's the highlight of my Friday. So thank you. Thank you so much for this. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for making the time when it's so late and just for being you. You're doing great. Great things. And yeah, please keep on rocking.
Likewise. Stay happy. Stay you. I mean, honestly, I say stay happy and I want to take that out immediately. I'm like, no, just stay you and happiness will continue to find you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lu. I really appreciate this.
Thanks, Rebecca. You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.